Pay attention to 23-year-old Christina Morris. At 3:55 a.m., surveillance cameras capture her walking into a parking garage with a former classmate. Two familiar faces disappearing into the shadows. She has less than 4 hours to live because the man beside her, Enrique Arochi, someone she knew from high school, is about to offer to walk her to her car, an offer Christina never agreed to. Inside that parking garage, in less than 3 minutes, Christina Morris vanishes. No screams, no struggle caught on camera, just silence. Her car will remain parked exactly where she left it, untouched. And at 3:58 a.m., Enrique Arochi's Camaro exits the garage. He appears to be alone. Christina is never seen alive again. This isn't a story about a stranger lurking in the dark. This isn't a random abduction. This is the story of a man who couldn't handle rejection, and the woman who paid the price for saying no.
Christina Morris was the kind of person who contacted her loved ones daily. Her mother, Johnny Hare, would later recall the last communication she had with her daughter, a selfie Christina sent before going out. Johnny replied telling her to be safe and have a good time. That selfie would become one of the last images of Christina alive. She was 23, building a life, maintaining friendships from high school, the type of person whose sudden silence immediately alarmed everyone who knew her. On the evening of August 29, 2014, heading into Labor Day weekend, Christina joined friends for an improvised reunion at the Shops at Legacy, an upscale mixed-use development in Plano. The gathering extended well past midnight. Among the group was Enrique Arochi, an acquaintance from high school. To everyone there, it seemed like a normal night out with old friends. No one suspected that by morning, Christina would be gone. In the early hours of August 30th, the streets were mostly empty. Christina prepared to leave. Her car, a Toyota Celica, was parked in the garage. Enrique Arochi offered to walk her to her car. It seemed like a courteous gesture. Two people leaving at the same time. Why wouldn't he walk with her? Security cameras captured them walking into the parking garage shadows. The footage showed them walking closely, their shoulders almost touching. At 3:55 a.m., cameras recorded Christina Morris and Enrique Arochi entering the parking garage. This is the last known sighting of Christina Morris alive. 3 minutes later, at 3:58 a.m., Arochi's Camaro exited the garage. He appeared to be alone. Christina's Toyota Celica never left the garage. It would be found exactly where she'd parked it, locked, undisturbed. Christina Morris had vanished in 3 minutes. When Christina failed to show up for work the following day and didn't communicate with her family, alarm bells went off immediately. This was highly uncharacteristic. Christina contacted her loved ones daily. Her silence was wrong. Her family and friends began contacting everyone associated with the night out. They needed answers. They needed to know where Christina had gone. Enrique Arochi was contacted early. His story was simple and consistent. He and Christina had walked to the garage together. They'd parted ways at their cars. He'd driven home. He had no idea where she'd gone after that. He denied any knowledge of her whereabouts. He seemed cooperative, concerned even. But something didn't add up. Christina's family began checking dumpsters near the garage. They mobilized search efforts. They distributed flyers. They contacted police. When investigators located Christina's Toyota Celica, still parked in the garage where she'd left it, the case shifted from a missing person to something far more sinister. If Christina had made it to her car, why hadn't she driven away? If she hadn't made it to her car, what had happened in those 3 minutes? Police began examining the security footage frame by frame. They tracked Christina and Arochi into the garage. They watched Arochi's Camaro exit alone. The timeline was clear. Christina Morris had entered that garage and never come out. Enrique Arochi had entered that garage with her and exited alone 3 minutes later. The question was, where was Christina? In the absence of a body, investigators had to build a case based on forensic science and digital evidence. They focused on Enrique Arochi, the last person seen with Christina Morris. His story, that they'd parted ways at their cars, began to crumble under scrutiny. investigators obtained a warrant to search Arochi's Camaro. They swabbed every surface, looking for evidence that Christina had been inside that vehicle. What they found was damning. Christina Morris's DNA was in the trunk of Arochi's car, not in the passenger seat where she might have sat if he'd given her a ride. In the trunk, the place you put things you want to hide, the place you put things you're transporting against their will. This evidence directly contradicted Arochi's claims. He'd said they separated at the garage. He'd said she walked to her car and he walked to his. But her DNA in his trunk told a different story. Christina had been in that Camaro, and she'd been in the trunk. Digital forensics provided another crucial piece of evidence. Cell phone tower data showed that shortly after Christina's disappearance, Arochi's phone had pinged off a tower in Anna, Texas, a town north of Plano. This wasn't on his route home. This was a detour. A significant detour to a relatively rural area. Why had Arochi driven to Anna, Texas in the early morning hours of August 30th? Investigators began searching the area around that cell tower ping. They combed through fields, wooded areas, construction sites. They brought in cadaver dogs. They organized volunteer search parties. For months, they found nothing. But they didn't stop looking. That cell phone ping meant something. Arochi had been in Anna for a reason. When police confronted Arochi with the DNA evidence and the cell tower data, his statements became inconsistent. He changed details. He couldn't explain the DNA in his trunk. He couldn't explain why he'd driven to Anna. The more investigators pressed, the more his story fell apart. But Arochi maintained his innocence. He hadn't hurt Christina. He didn't know where she was. He was being falsely accused. Prosecutors faced a difficult decision. They had compelling evidence that Arochi had abducted Christina Morris. The surveillance footage, the DNA in the trunk, the cell tower data, the inconsistent statements. It all pointed to kidnapping. But without a body, they couldn't prove murder. They couldn't prove Christina was dead. So they charged Enrique Arochi with aggravated kidnapping. The trial laid out the evidence systematically. The jury watched the surveillance footage of Christina and Arochi walking into the garage at 3:55 a.m. They watched Arochi's Camaro exit at 3:58 a.m. They heard forensic experts testify about the DNA found in the trunk. They saw the cell tower data placing Arochi in Anna, Texas. They listened to testimony about Arochi's changing statements. The defense argued the evidence was circumstantial. There was no body. There was no proof Christina was actually harmed. The DNA could be explained away. Maybe she'd put something in his trunk earlier. Maybe the cell tower data was wrong. Maybe Arochi was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. The jury didn't buy it. After reviewing all the evidence, they found Enrique Arochi guilty of aggravated kidnapping. He was sentenced to life in prison with eligibility for parole after 30 years. Throughout the trial, Arochi maintained his innocence. Public observers noted his demeanor. Some described him as viewing himself as the victim of false accusations. He seemed to feel wronged, persecuted, unjustly imprisoned. He showed no remorse, no concern for Christina, no acknowledgement that his actions had destroyed a family. Christina's family felt relief that Arochi was behind bars. But the conviction didn't bring them what they truly wanted. They wanted Christina back. They wanted to know where she was. They wanted to bring her home. And so, the searching continued. On Wednesday, March 7, 2018, a construction crew was clearing brush for a new housing development in Anna, Texas. Andy Mitchell, a member of the crew, was working on a hillside when he noticed something in a small opening: a skull. Near the skeletal remains, the crew found a dress and undergarments that appeared to match the clothing Christina had been wearing when she vanished. The location was significant. It was in the area authorities had searched before, guided by the cell tower pings from Arochi's phone. For nearly 4 years, Christina had been there, just yards from where volunteers had walked, hidden by brush and terrain until construction cleared the land. Investigators spent 3 days gathering evidence at the scene. On Thursday, March 8, 2018, the Plano Police Department and the medical examiner confirmed what everyone already knew in their hearts. The remains belonged to Christina Morris. After 1,286 days, Christina had been found. The condition of the remains presented challenges. 3 years of exposure to wind, rain, and animals had taken their toll. Determining the exact cause of death would be difficult. But legal experts noted that, for a murder case, the exact mechanism of death was less critical than establishing the death was a homicide and identifying the victim. They had both. The discovery of Christina's body fundamentally changed the legal landscape. Prosecutors could now build a murder case against Arochi, who was already serving life for kidnapping. But a significant legal complexity arose regarding capital murder charges. Toby Shook, a former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney, explained the double jeopardy problem. To secure a capital murder charge, which carries the potential for the death penalty, prosecutors must prove the murder was committed during the commission of another felony. In this case, that felony would be kidnapping. But Arochi had already been tried and convicted for that kidnapping. The state is forbidden from using the same kidnapping charge as the aggravating factor for a new capital murder trial. Double jeopardy protections prevented it. Capital murder was off the table, but a standard murder charge remained viable. Shook noted that the evidence from the kidnapping trial, the surveillance footage, the DNA, the cell phone records, would serve as a blueprint for the murder trial. The key difference was the presence of the body, providing the corpus delicti necessary for homicide charges. If convicted of murder, Arochi could face a second life sentence. Prosecutors could request the judge stack this sentence on top of the existing kidnapping sentence, meaning the second life term would only begin after the first was completed. Effectively, this would ensure Arochi remains in prison for life without possibility of parole, as the cumulative years would exceed a natural lifespan. Legal analysts suggested prosecutors might use the threat of a murder trial to leverage a plea deal where Arochi would drop his appeal of the kidnapping conviction or finally admit guilt. But Arochi continued to maintain his innocence. The case of Christina Morris is a tragedy that extended far beyond 3 minutes in a parking garage. It involved years of investigation, relentless searching by volunteers, and the forensic application of DNA and digital evidence to secure justice. Enrique Arochi is serving life in prison for kidnapping, likely to face additional murder charges that will ensure he never leaves prison alive. But justice doesn't bring Christina back. It doesn't erase the nearly 4 years her family spent searching, hoping, refusing to give up. It doesn't change the fact that Christina Morris went out with friends on a Friday night and never came home because a man she trusted offered to walk her to her car. Christina Morris deserved to make it home that night. She deserved to build the life she was working toward. She deserved friends and family and all the ordinary moments that make up a life. Instead, she got 3 minutes in a parking garage with someone who saw her as something he was entitled to take. Christina's family rejected the concept of closure. They never wanted closure. They only wanted Christina. They got her back, but not the way they prayed for. Sarah Estes' words capture the heartbreak perfectly. Giving up is not an option. Can't stop, won't stop. For nearly 4 years, they didn't stop. They searched every weekend. They kept her name alive. They refused to let her be forgotten. Enrique Arochi has never admitted what he did. He maintains his innocence even now, serving life in prison, facing potential murder charges. He married someone while incarcerated, prompting outrage from people who cannot understand how anyone would marry a man convicted of kidnapping. He showed no remorse during his trial, no concern for Christina, no acknowledgement of the devastation he caused. Remember Christina Morris's name. Remember that she mattered. Remember that her case inspired a school nurse to begin documenting every woman killed by a man in America, because the government wasn't doing it. Remember that thousands of volunteers searched for her every weekend for nearly 4 years, because giving up was not an option. 3 minutes in a parking garage. That's all it took for Enrique Arochi to destroy Christina Morris's life and devastate everyone who loved her. Remember her name, Christina Morris. She deserved to live.